for today's stream.
All
All right, we're live. Gutta and I are here. We're live. It's Heat Map Fantasy Sports Live, NFL Week 2. We were talking about Rainmakers off the air. I'm into Rainmakers. I was explaining it to Gutta. Welcome to Week 2. Gutta, good morning.
Good morning. How's it going?
Great.
So we're coming on live, and we already have our first breaking inactive of the day. Alvin Kamara is officially out already.
Yep. Oh, I gotta put this. I got the scroll. I didn't click the scroll. I had the Rainmaker stuff. I'll put this scroll up first. I've got some Rainmakers investments made for the end of the stream. I'll scroll. We got Kamara in there. Oh, that says Week 1 injury report. It's Week 2. I'll change that before we update. This is Heat Map Fantasy Sports Live, by the way. We are Heat Map Fantasy Sports. $3.99 a week gets everything that we do. All of our Slack chats, all of our articles, all of our everything. It's a really good investment for under $4 a week. We talk about sports betting, DFS, best ball. The best ball resurrection is out now starting week 6 on Underdog. So we will probably enter some lineups into that and talk about best ball, the resurrection, which is really cool. Sports betting, we put a lot of sports bets up there. A lot of interesting bets this week. I'm betting heavily, for me at least, on the Miami game. I've been obsessed with that game this week. But I want to start with the story, if you will indulge me, Gutta.
Sure.
So my dad, Papa Stan, who's probably watching right now. So hey, Dad, and hey, Heath. He's probably with my brother Heath, who a lot of you know. Gutta, you know my brother. Chicagoland. You buy some cards from him.
Oh yeah.
So he's probably hanging out with my dad right now. So my dad, who has been playing fantasy sports on and off, but not so much the last few years, since 1986. So we're talking way back. Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, those were like his boys. And so he's playing with his friends back in '86. Big into fantasy, started our home league, our long-running home league that we ran for over 30 years. I started playing in '89 as a 12-year-old, and I whooped all their asses and won the championship. Retired with the most championships, but, that's neither here nor there. The league, we went defunct this year, but my dad hasn't played for a few years. He played a little bit last year with my nephew. They had some fun, but he hasn't really been following the sport as much. But, when we were at Foxwoods this summer, he decided, hey, we were at the DraftKings Sportsbook, and he signed up for an account, and he's like, hey, I want to learn how to play fantasy. I want to learn how to sports bet a little bit more. I want to have some investment on Sundays because he goes and watches with my brother. And so my brother is really into the sports betting far more than I am in terms of putting a large number of bets out there. So my dad worked with him, but then my dad and I spent hours yesterday talking about fantasy DFS and DFS strategy. And I think a few things came from that. And I want to share those couple of things that came from that because I think it's really important for what we do. First of all, my dad, who's a fantasy noob when it comes to DFS, right? Again, has played for years, so he understands what fantasy sports is, but he doesn't know as much of the current players, and he surely doesn't understand or hadn't understood DFS strategy, GPPs. He doesn't know the lingo. And again, I sat with him for a couple hours yesterday, and this morning he shot me a lineup that was really good. Like, he read your article, Gutta. He was talking to me about Sean's article. He was talking about my article, and you could tell he read the article, understood what we were doing, and he went from building a shit lineup, which we will talk about in a second, and that's not to knock him because he just doesn't know, to building a really good lineup, which is really similar to one of my favorite GPP lineups. It's a Washington stack with a Detroit bring back. There was a secondary stack in there. It was really good. It was a well-constructed GPP lineup. There was one guy I didn't love in his lineup. We kind of talked through who we could put in the flex spot, and with a little bit of coaching, and he actually ended up making a really good choice, and he had J.D. McKissick in there, and I didn't think he needed to put McKissick based on the price point, and he actually went to Chase Claypool, who I really like this week. So I was like, oh, cool. So with lesson number one is a little bit of coaching, which is what we do at Heat Map Fantasy Sports. Is all going to come back to this. You can become a pretty good player. Like, you can pick up on it pretty quickly. Now, my dad has played fantasy. He's an intuitive guy. He's really bright. But, new to DFS, but he learned pretty quickly. So that really speaks to what we do and the ability that we have to teach the game, which I think is really important. Second thing we learned, and this is, again, not to crap on my dad, his initial lineup, when he sat down and says, hey, Doug, can you look at my lineups? I was like, sure, Dad, what do you got? His quarterback for the week, and you can feel free to laugh. He won't judge that we're laughing at him. His quarterback was Taysom Hill, and he had O.J. Howard as tight end. And I think those were the two most important players to talk about in terms of what's out there. And this lesson really comes out to, like, what's the general public look like for fantasy? Well, my dad had Taysom Hill. Why? Because Taysom Hill had a, quote, really good game last week. Now, yes, he scored 15 points. He had 80 some odd rushing yards and a touchdown. But we know from digging deeper that Taysom Hill had 15 snaps. He was only on the field for 20% of the snaps for New Orleans. Now, with Alvin Kamara out, he might be a better play as a tight end on the sites that allow that, FanDuel, but he is his DraftKings, and he had him as his quarterback. And I was like, yeah, you got to look past just the box score, and you got to dig deeper. He also had O.J. Howard because O.J. Howard, quote, had a really good game. O.J. Howard had the third most snaps from the tight end position on his own team last week. He's the pass-catching tight end, but he's a secondary pass-catching tight end. Now, again, unbeknownst to my father, it's not the worst play if Brevin Jordan is ruled out today. But in Brevin Jordan's the pass-catching tight end, and Pharaoh Cooper is the blocking tight end. O.J. Howard, in theory, won't see as many snaps. But and there was no correlation in his lineup. He needed to hit that 9-person parlay. He needed 9 things to go right, including Taysom Hill having a QB1 day to win that tournament. That was his Millie Maker lineup. I get being contrarian, but he didn't understand strategy, roster construction, all those things. That's what the general fantasy player is like, though. And that's, again, not to rip my dad, that's to understand, just a little bit of coaching and training and strategy puts you so far ahead of the field who looks at last week's scores. And I know you talked about this in your article, Gutta, about overreacting to last week and overreacting to the box scores and not digging deeper. And that's so true because my dad, who's a very bright man, had Taysom Hill as his quarterback and felt that it was a good play because it's a little bit different and he had a good week, when in reality, as a quarterback on DraftKings, that is not remotely a good play. And unless James Winston's ruled out and he's in, but that's not the situation. So I think those 2 lessons from spending some time with my dad, a little bit of coaching can lead you a long way. The general fantasy player, said with as much love as I can muster, it's just not very good because they don't understand the strategy the way that a site like ours understands it. Because we spend a lot of time digging through strategy, watching videos, reading, learning, experimenting. And there's a reason our players do better, or people at RG and the people at RotoWire and the people, all the other sites out there, we're just better players than the general public to people who are unsubscribed to sites. So I think having what we do really makes a difference. And that showed me, because I'm, again, talking to a really bright man who had no clue what he was doing, and put your lineup against his lineup 100 times, your lineup is winning 80 of those times. He might win occasionally if Taysom Hill and, O.J. Howard had a week like they had last week, but in general, our lineups are going to beat those lineups a significant majority of the time. Just a little selling point into what we do, Gutta. And for the general public out there who is like, hey, why should I subscribe to your site? Over on my Twitter page in the my pinned tweets with the link for under $4 a week for all the sports that we cover. Why should I do that? Well, because we make you a better player, because you're not starting Taysom Hill as your quarterback this week. That's why. So, Gutta, what's your initial thoughts for the week? Thank you for indulging me and letting me do story time with Doug. I really do appreciate that. What do we got? Where is your head at this week? What's your thing this week?
Well, it's a weird one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of decision points, because all of the high scoring spots are popular. There's nothing really being overlooked from the high, I guess from the high end standpoint, right? That, anything that is perceived as a good spot is being owned relatively heavy, and everything that's a bad spot is kind of being overlooked, at least perceived as the bad spots. The only quote unquote good spot kind of being overlooked, I guess you could say, is Denver, but more so Russell Wilson, because Javonte Williams is carrying ownership, Albert O is carrying ownership, and Sutton and Judy are combining for ownership. It's kind of split between the two of them. But Russell Wilson is being quite overlooked. He's going to be pretty low down. Yeah, on the ownership part. So, on something like that, for the most part, and I kind of wrote this about this with Washington and Detroit, if all the pieces are popular, the quarterback for the most part probably has to do something for it to work. Well, I do think Washington and Detroit is a spot that it can be a little bit of the opposite, just the way the pieces do break down there. Guys can do well with their quarterbacks doing poorly, especially given the prices and the likelihood it's going to be one or the other and not everything. Where I think in Denver, it's different. I think you can see everything kind of go off and really pay off, and you would really need Russell Wilson to make that work a little more also. But yeah, I mean, there's, I think there's spots you maybe look at line movement as well and see where things are going. Like, I know, New England has moved to a 3-point favorite, which is pretty surprising, especially on the road. Baltimore is up to 3.5. Carolina was a 2-point dog. Now they're a 1-point favorite. Like, things have moved. I'm actually surprised New Orleans hasn't moved more. Just with the general sentiment on that game, and also too, it looks like Julio. It's not official yet, but it looks like Julio is going to be out today also for Tampa. And Gage probably active. So Tampa's in a very weird spot there. So seeing certain things. But yeah, and then from there, I think it's just all about getting exposure to the teams that have a chance to do something, have some higher totals, or are in bigger spots like San Fran and Cleveland. I think some exposure there makes sense because you got guys in good spots but being overlooked because they're playing against bad offenses.
And today we're going to go a little old school with how we format the show, and we like to stretch the first 15 minutes until inactives come out, and then we will go into the meat of our show. I think today we're going to dive in to just go game by game and talk about safer plays, cash plays, leverage plays, tournament plays. I think that's the best way to go this week because it's a weird week in my mind. Also, we'll take questions. If you just go into the chat box and put your question in, we will put it up on the screen and answer it as best we can for you because this show is for you. Otherwise, it's just Gutta and I indulging ourselves, which, if you're a regular viewer of our show, we don't mind doing. We are both fairly long-winded. So there, we don't mind going off on that. I do want to ask, though, Gutta, because you're very in tune with the roster percentages. The games of the week this week, in my mind, the best games, or more popular games, or the games that I've been focusing on, Baltimore, Washington, Detroit, Arizona, Las Vegas. Are those the three games that are they carrying the most ownership, or do we have an opportunity to stack one of those sides as sort of a leverage opportunity here, or is that where the six biggest boosts of stacking ownership is going to be?
What you cut out a little bit? I'm sorry. What were I know Arizona, Las Vegas. What were the other two?
Oh no, that's okay. Arizona, Las Vegas, Washington, Detroit, and Miami, Baltimore. Those are the three biggest in terms of where stacking is going to come from, or is there leverage there?
So Miami, Baltimore, for the most part, it's kind of mixed. Lamar will have some popularity. He always does. Andrews a little popularity just because Tyreek will be one of the higher owned guys, but if you're looking to stack that game, it's definitely going to be unique. Like I think that's a game the individual pieces carry some ownership. I just don't think you see anything kind of combined. So
this is my favorite start to a lineup this week.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to see much. Obviously, if you're playing in the Million Maker or Fields with 20,000 lineups, yeah, you'll probably see that lineup mixed in. But if you try to play some of the smaller fields like I do, maybe you'll see one lineup like that. I just don't think there's much popularity to that game as a stack type.
Good. I like it. I think Miami is in a good spot. Baltimore's secondary is completely depleted, and Tua's got the weapons. Right. This is one of those weeks where Tua's got to show it this week.
Yeah, and I think you can. I think you can mix in Edmonds in there if you want to save a little salary and use Edmonds over Waddle potentially. That is that's an interesting way to go about it as well because Edmonds played like 70% of the snaps last week. I mean, we've seen in the past if he's playing that much, he's probably not going to hold up, and he's really not built to run that much. He's much more of a he can be the 1A, but 55-60% of the snaps more on the pass downs. So I think that he's built a little better for that. And then, Washington, Detroit, I think it's going to be kind of a similar story. You'll probably see more game stacks of Washington, Detroit. But like with the DeAndre Swift news this morning that he may be, potentially a little limited during the game, even if he plays, that's bringing down ownership. And I think people are flocking a little bit elsewhere because as the week goes on, it's kind of like, well, it's Washington and Detroit, it's Wentz and Goff. What people were excited for on Tuesday because of what these teams did on Sunday has wavered a little bit. And again, that it's one of the higher total games on the slate. I think it's still the
second highest.
Second. So I mean, there's reason to use there. I think you're going to see the pieces more than the entire game. And then for Arizona, Las Vegas, this is far and away going to be the most popular thing. I mean, Carr and Adams are looking to be, projected number one at each of their positions, which, that'll easily be the highest, stack there. If you, draw it down a little bit, if you add Renfro or Waller to it, that will add uniqueness, but still, I think it'll be a little more common than anticipated. And really, if you want to get the same exposure and arguably a little more even upside, I think maybe the better way to go from exposure and upside standpoint would be, using Kyler Murray as the quarterback on it. Because, I mean, realistically, with Derek Carr is not a bad quarterback. He is pretty good. No. I just don't know if he's got that true, QB nuclear upside. If this game shoots out, sure, Carr's going to give you 25, 26 points. It's going to be the 4X on his salary, but I don't think Carr's got 35 to 40 point upside. Kyler Murray, I would argue Kyler Murray has it because he's done that in the past. He does run. He's got a little more that he can do than Carr does, or Carr is just going to sit in the pocket for you. Again, if this game totals 70 points, Carr may throw 5 touchdowns, and I'm completely wrong, but we've never really seen that from Carr in the past. So that's sort of the thing, is his game going to all of a sudden go to a new level in his, 10th year in the league, 9th year in the league?
Probably not.
I'd argue no. Again, I think he's a really great play. I've got Carr on my cash game lineup. I think he's going to have a strong game, but when we're talking tournaments and GPPs, well, how strong can he be that if you're going to eat the ownership of it, you really need that top level game and, find your uniqueness elsewhere.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. I've got Carr in my cash plus lineup because I like stacking that game because of the popularity. I've got Wentz in my straight cash lineup, and I am playing both cash and cash plus and tournaments this week. Inactives. Julio out. That's the only real big one. If you're looking at the Jets inactive, they have a defender named Bryce Hall, not Breece Hall. Breece Hall's active. Yeah. Bryce Hall is out. Don't freak out, team. If Breece Hall's playing, not that I think we're going to use him. I don't see using him. I don't think he's, I think we're much more interested in Michael Carter, if anyone, but probably avoiding Jets mostly today.
Yeah. It's,
let's see. Wandale is out.
Yeah. So also too, for the Bucs, their left tackle is out today as well, which, Fournette's carrying quite a bit of ownership, I guess, because the Bucs are banged up a bit, but not having their starting, the O-line was played much better than anticipated last week with all their injuries against the Cowboys. But Parsons kind of carved them up a little bit, especially through the middle. And I think it's tough sledding for Fournette in this one.
I think it's gonna be a rough game for the Buccaneers in general.
Yeah, I mean, especially if he's going to carry a ton of ownership. I mean, listen, there's definitely 20 to 25 type upside on the opportunities, but I don't know what much he may do. Go ahead.
I would say DeAndre Swift is active, but Frank Ragnow is out again, the center. So, and they are going to potentially limit Swift. So keep an eye on that one. We said it in chat this morning. If you've got a viable alternative, a Kareem Hunt type player, I think Kareem Hunt I'd rather use over a DeAndre Swift this week. Then we were asked about Ramondre Stevenson. I would probably use Swift over Stevenson this week. That's kind of where that line is. And then we were asked about Miles Sanders versus DeAndre Swift, and that to me is a little closer. I probably use Sanders just to be safe, but I can make the argument both ways. I'm not using Swift in I'm not using Swift at all in DFS this week. I think I might have some Jamal Williams exposure here and there, but probably avoiding that backfield and just going with Amon-Ra or maybe DJ Chark in that game and just calling it a day. Also, and we're going to talk Rainmakers for a second. Rashad Perryman might be a good pickup. He's selling on the core for $1.15. It's one of the cheaper cards. You go out and grab him. He should get some playing time today if you want to fill in a lineup in Rainmakers. I think Rashad Perryman's a good pickup. If he has a good game, sell him after the game. If he goes up to $3, I mean, you'll 3x your money, 2.5x. Dumpster diving in Rainmakers to me is a really good strategy, and I've made decent money dumpster diving. So, I was telling Gutta off air, I went and bought Gerald Everett and a couple of Joshua Kellys earlier in the week this week. And then right before kickoff on Thursday night, I sold them for $5 on both the running backs and about $10 on Everett. Easy 5x on my money for very little work. Buy those island games, those showdowns, or players that just got thrust into a starting role. I'll be definitely watching the Rashad Perryman market over the next hour to see if I could just sell my card right now. I bought him for $1.15. And I would probably be happy to sell him for $4 or $5 today. So it's just something to think about.
I mean, he's definitely going to be the number 3 today with the injuries that they have. And again, if history repeats and Evans is shut down by Lattimore, Perriman's kind of the de facto number 2.
And even if you're not looking to resell him necessarily right away, if you're not playing the market, he's $1.15. You could throw him in your lineup and build a Rainmakers lineup pretty cheaply with him as one of your receivers or your flex option. It's not the worst thing in the world. And also in DFS, right? I mean, I can't imagine Perryman is all that expensive this week. It wouldn't shock me if he was close to or at min price. Let's look and see. Where's Perryman this week? Haven't even really looked at him much. Perryman on DFS, $3,200.
Yeah,
$3,200.
Right.
I mean, that's not a terribly bad price right there. You get him in there as a last option if you want to use a big lineup. I know Gutta had talked about running a lineup with Adams and a couple other higher end players. Well, you need cheap players. Perryman's a guy who's going to see snaps, right? He's going to get on the field for the whatever a third wide receiver would give you. He'll get on the field for 60% of the snaps, and with Tom Brady throwing to him, especially with Lattimore on Evans, which is like kryptonite. If you're running Tampa, and I also think in Showdown he makes a lot of sense as a cheap option in Showdown. Let's check the Showdown price on Perryman. Because if you're going to play that, because a lot of people like to chase those crowns on the DK achievements. Well, one of the things is playing those showdowns, and Tampa Bay, New Orleans is the featured showdown for the early slate. So there's a lot more money out there. And let's see what Perryman is listed at. Perryman is, just keep scrolling, $1,800. That is a very cheap option right there. So you can use other players. Kind of dig that. I'm kind of digging that.
Yeah.
Anything else from the injury report that you see?
Yeah, so a couple of minor things, nothing too major, but so for the Ravens, Nick Boyle is inactive again, so kind of same story on Isaiah Likely. If you don't want to, where is Likely? I didn't even look at Likely this week, but if you are, he's 2,500. So if you're looking to differentiate off the Juwan Johnson, minimum price tight end, Likely will probably get a couple of targets again. As the number 2 tight end, we saw it last week, and again. If he gets 5 targets at his price, he can definitely make something happen. So you got that there. Also, another low-price tight end. You can actually probably look at Tyler Conklin for the Jets. Uzama's out, and one of their other backups, Lawrence Cager, is out. So the Jets' tight end depth is basically non-existent. It's going to be Conklin and the rookie Ruckert. Conklin was definitely the number 1 tight end last week for them. He did see 7 targets. The Jets probably going to have to pass a ton again today, would be my guess. So, you could do worse down there if Conklin's getting 7 targets again. 3,400, he could pay it off easily, and he's going to have no ownership there. So something a little bit deeper. And
I've got quite a bit of exposure to Conklin today. I love Conklin today. Love him today.
It makes sense.
Especially as a pivot off of a much more widely rostered Albert O. I think Conklin is a real nice option there for $300 cheaper. Still prefer Juwan Johnson as a punt, but I do like Conklin a lot. I'm glad you brought him up.
Yeah, and one other thing, not necessarily fantasy related, but I don't think last week it happened, but Mason Rudolph's actually inactive for Pittsburgh today, which I thought he was the number 2. So if Pickett's the number 2, Trubisky, even though they won last week, might already be on a short leash. And, going against New England, Belichick can shut down bad quarterbacks. So if Trubisky's looking really bad, maybe we see Pickett today, or maybe they're already grooming Pickett for next week. I don't know. But, from an NFL type thing, not fantasy, but I thought that was interesting to see as well.
Yeah, I will also throw Pickett
other than that,
other
than that, with we haven't touched on it here. Touched on it in Slack a little bit earlier for our members, but with Kamara being out, listen, Ingram's going to get probably 80% of the work. There's nobody else in that backfield. It's not a good matchup by any stretch, but Ingram's the same price as Daryl Henderson this week, and when we're anticipating Henderson getting 80% of the work again, like he did last week. But what if Akers gets worked in more? He's looking a little better during the week, doing whatever he needs to do during practice to get McVay's trust back. If Henderson sees some less touches, Ingram's gonna get the work. It just is. So at that same price, it's definitely risky because Tampa is one of the best run defenses in the league, but they did allow the second most catches to running backs last year, and they, it's not really improved yet. So maybe there is something for Ingram. Again, it's it's much more risky than Henderson is, but you don't have any ownership. So if Ingram does something today and Henderson fails or just kind of gets there, Ingram, you're lapping the field with Ingram over Henderson. But again, you have a lot more downside there, I think.
Let me throw this idea out there, which is ironic since I crapped on him earlier in the show in the lead, but not on DraftKings. We're not using Taysom Hill on DraftKings at quarterback, but on FanDuel, he is listed as a tight end. On Underdog, he is listed as a tight end. I know I used him as my tight end when I did the Battle Royal. When I went and did the draft this week, I used him in one of my lineups as the tight end. First of all, Jameis was questionable at the time, and I was like, ooh, I could double my quarterback. He's the second most expensive tight end on the slate, the early part at least today. Taysom Hill over on DraftKings or over on FanDuel. You want to get a little funky.
Wait, he's the second price tight end on FanDuel?
If I read that correctly earlier, and maybe I was just looking at one team, but I'm going to pull it up right now. I'm pretty sure over on FanDuel, Taysom Hill, in the early only slate, I think he was the second most expensive. I could be wrong. Let's see if Doug's on drugs today. Nope, he's the second most expensive tight end in the early only slate at $6,200. And on the main slate, that would make him. Let's pull up the main slate. Let's pop that open. Millie Maker here. Let's see. Taysom Hill is the third most expensive tight end on the main slate. He is going to carry no ownership. He had 15 snaps last week, which again, not the quarterback, but with Kamara out, with Tampa giving up receptions to running backs, with the fact that it doesn't matter who coaches this team, they're in love with Taysom Hill. He must have pictures of Dennis Allen's wife too, or something. I'm not opposed to using him in a tournament lineup, a milli maker, a multi-entry on FanDuel as your tight end, and surely not as your tight end if you're saving tight end for your last position in a underdog draft. I think because I do think he'll see more than 15 snaps this week. I do think it's very likely he could get the inside the 5 work as both a quarterback, a tight end, and a running back. I think we're going to see more than 15 snaps from Taysom Hill this week. I don't think he's a quarterback worthy over on DraftKings. I do think he's very much in play in Showdown on DraftKings. I did just put him in my Showdown lineup for that game. I wouldn't even be opposed to using him as your captain, but there is a route where Taysom Hill is usable outside of the quarterback position this week. He's not someone you can use a quarterback, but outside that position, I think he, in that Ingram mold, holds some weight as a high touchdown equity. And I would want to see. I just keep pulling it up. Why don't I just pull it up? Like, it's not like we're, overly crazy here. I want to know what his anytime touchdown prop is, because I think an anytime touchdown from Taysom Hill, if it's anywhere above like 3 to 1, is a really good price. I don't know if you have that handy in your face at the moment, Gutta, but since we do like sports betting, I do think an anytime touchdown score on Taysom Hill anytime. Ooh, I don't know that as much. Plus 215. That's a little rich for my blood. I think 2 to 1 on money is not great. I do think he scores, so I think there's something to that, or I think he's got a good probability of scoring. But I do think, Taysom Hill's viable. Anyway, let's see. There's something in the chat. Let's see who that is. Is it a question, or is it my dad giving me a hard time? Nope. It's all right. Chris wants to know. Morning, Chris. Pitskin Pick'em, thoughts on Bucks, Saints, Giant, Panthers, just in terms of wins. I like Giants and Saints. Not sure if I'm in the majority here, though, but I like Giants and Saints here. What are your thoughts on that? Good, just a quick pick on both.
I like the Saints also, but I think the Panthers are the better pick in that game.
Oh, break my heart, Jets fan. What do you know? No, I'm just kidding. Let's talk games. Let's break down some games. I do want to get out around 12:15 today instead of 12:30. I think it is enough, and I think it gives us time to set lineups, go onto Slack, and help our members. We do have one more comment. Snakes likes Juwan Johnson. Absolutely. Got him in the player pool. He's in my cash and cash plus lineup. Love Juwan Johnson this week. Saw a ton of snaps, more touchdown equity with Kamara out. Love Juwan Johnson this week. Let's break down some of these games. Good. We'll just give some quick thoughts, talk further if we need to. Giants and any guys? I like Saquon Barkley in cash. In cash plus, I would run it back with Robbie Anderson. Anderson is he's been a target hog, actually. He's far better than people give him credit for. And with a semi-competent quarterback in Baker Mayfield, I think he's a tournament guy and a run back guy with Saquon in a tournament setting or a cash plus setting. Do you have any tournament plays? I guess that's how we'll do it. Since I write the cash article, I'll give cash options, you give tournament options. You got any tournament plays you got any interest in tournaments in Carolina and the Giants?
DJ Moore. I like him this week. I think I'd rather use. I guess Anderson's fine, but I'd rather use Moore over him. I think Moore is the better receiver there. And then also too on the Giants end, if you're looking for differentiation on cheaper receivers, Shepard or Richie James, you can probably mix in a little bit.
What's your read on Kadarius Toney?
He's active today, but I can't trust him. Eventually he's going to get out of the doghouse and do something, but you can't trust it. Unless you're building 150 lineups, then you can sprinkle some Toney in that, maybe last week was a message and now he's gotten the message through his head and he's ready to go and he's going to play 80% of the snaps. Then, you want Toney at 4,200 as an insane steal, but unless you're just building tons and tons of lineups, you really can't trust it.
You know what's crazy to me? He's $100 more expensive than he was last week. Also, for wrestling fans, he looks like Ron the Truth Killings. Looks like our truth, which is ridiculous. Question about tournament strategy in this game. With Saquon Barkley, probably again, you're more keyed into the roster percentage than I am. Is he going to be one of the top 3 rostered running backs this week, Barkley? My guess is he's probably not. Is he in the top 3?
Yeah, he'll be up there. He probably will end up being number 1 when all is said and done.
So tournament wise, if we're running a GPP, simple leverage, McCaffrey with Richie James, a McCaffrey Shepard stack, is that looking more viable for a tournament? Lower the ownership on Barkley simply by pairing him with DJ Moore or Sterling Shepard? Like, let's go with that question. Barkley and one of the Carolina receivers, or McCaffrey and one of the Giants receivers for a multi-entry GPP?
For correlation purposes, I'd rather Barkley with one of the Panthers receivers. Because I mean, if you're using McCaffrey, I don't think you need the correlation there, because given his price, he's going to be ownership will be off of him enough, because basically at that point your leverage of correlation is almost McCaffrey over the high-priced receivers. So you're hoping that the high-priced receivers don't get there, and McCaffrey does.
Good point.
So you're kind of playing it that way, and same sort of thing. Like if Barkley goes off, maybe this game's a little higher scoring, so you're taking advantage of that with McCaffrey and just hoping McCaffrey does more than Barkley does. But yeah, to lower Barkley's ownership, yeah, I would. You can definitely add in a Panthers receiver, but on the McCaffrey end, I think if you're using McCaffrey, you don't have to really worry about much else from that game, unless you're trying to get different. And if you do Barkley and McCaffrey, it's not going to be much of that question out there. It's a little difficult, but that's something that you can approach as well.
I mean, right? I think very rarely are we going to stack two running backs from the same game. I think there's a couple of chances to do that this week. One in this game, because of their pass catching prowess, and the other would be the Cleveland game, which we'll talk about next, where you just run both running backs from the Browns because of the way that they're used. I do think a way to get real different, because people are looking to maybe spend up for Devonte Adams, Cooper Kupp this week. Hitting McCaffrey, Barkley is a real good way, I think, to get a little bit different this week. With your lineups, you just have to spend down at wide receiver, but there's so many spend down options at wide receiver. It's not difficult to do that this week. A lot of spend down options this week. I think with Michael Pittman going out, we have opened up a world of possibilities at wide receiver, plus the rest of our lineup to just spend big. Plus with the Giants receivers being so cheap too. Anything else on the Giants game, or you want to move to your team? We haven't talked about them much this year.
No, nothing else on the Giants. Giants.
Panthers. All right. Jets Cleveland, from a cash perspective, I'm not opposed to Conklin, but again, I'd rather spend $900 less and just get Juwan Johnson. Otherwise, I have him in the pool, Michael Carter, just because I think the Giants. So I think he's going to get. Flacco likes to check down. He did last week, at least. I mean, the number of targets between Carter, Conklin, and Breece Hall was ridiculous, and I do think Carter will see that same level of usage this week. 19 opportunities at $5,200 makes a lot of sense. He's probably a tournament option, more so in terms of a pivot off of who will probably be a higher owned Jeffrey Wilson. I don't really see a lot of cash love. I will say, just from a Rainmaker's perspective, I've been buying Mike White, really cheap Mike White, because the Jets fans were calling for him last week. And if Flacco has a short leash, there's a real good chance if Flacco gets pulled and Mike White goes in the game, you're going to be able to sell that Mike White for double or triple what you paid for him in game. You'll be able to do it right as the game's being played. So I do think there's a little bit of an investment opportunity, because quarterbacks are so high end in Rainmakers. There's money to be made there. I'd also probably take the under on Joe Flacco's passing prop. I have no idea what it is, but my guess is he will go under, because Cleveland's got a semi-good defense. Jets aren't very appealing today. Anything in this game from a tournament perspective that you think is viable, Gutta?
Nick Chubb. Love some Nick Chubb. These are always.
I thought you should say I love some Chubb, and I'm going to laugh my ass off.
I mean, listen, these are the spots that that we target guys like Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, at home against the bad teams, 6.5 point favorites. I mean, this is where this is, if you're ever going to use Chubb, this is the spot that you use him. I think it's a great play, and even better, I mean, Chubb with the Browns defense. The Bengals are going to be through the roof because they're facing Cooper Rush, but I mean, is Joe Flacco that much better than Cooper Rush in reality? Probably not.
No.
And the Browns defense
so
is
expensive.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, yes, the Bengals, they're basically at the minimum price. Yeah, you can just use them everywhere and just eat the chalk and forget it. But again, sometimes those type of differentiation things can really get you. The Jets' offensive line is, I mean, they're on their like third string tackles already. They're so beat up. There's no way they're going to contain the Browns' pass rush. And then again, if it's like last week and Flacco's throwing 40 to 50 times, I mean, there's an interception or two coming. I just think that's where it goes. And again, if Chubb is going to have that big game, odds are the Browns are probably controlling it pretty easily, and the defense is doing relatively well.
I did ask for tournament options, so I guess me complaining about price is me being a dick for no reason. Like, I do think at their price, they're definitely going to be a pivot off the Bengals. Bengals will carry the most ownership. So yeah, Browns are in a real good spot here. I did have one other question. I can't remember for the life of me what it was. Both running backs in a single lineup, you interested in that at all, or is that not something you're looking to do this week at all? Particularly, I would say that is a more viable strategy in an early only setting.
No, I think even in the full field, but that's going to be like larger field tournaments. Like, I don't have any lineups with it this week. I'm not really playing any of those big tournaments. But it's definitely a differentiator move because they're they're probably 60% of the offense at this point, if not more. Again, it's definitely a larger field thing because you kind of need both of them to score a touchdown, if not 2 touchdowns each to kind of get there. And the odds are pretty low on that. But again, if you're in a tournament with 15,000 people, you probably will be the only lineup that has it,
And if you're running both running backs,
but
I would say if you're running both running backs, are you definitely putting the Cleveland defense in at that point too? Because you're just telling the story that Cleveland's going to wipe out the Jets.
Oh yeah, you have to, because if Hunt goes off and Chubb kind of does it, probably unless fluky things happen, probably means Hunt's catching a bit more passes and it's more competitive. And if Chubb goes off versus Hunt, the Browns are probably dominating. But also too, if the Browns are dominating, maybe Chubb dominates the first half, Hunt dominates the second half as the game's getting a little out of control, and both guys can maybe hit value that way.
Oh, see, I was thinking of it the other way, that they used Hunt a little bit earlier. He got the goal line touches, and then to just have Chubb just run it out at the end of the game. I do think from a betting perspective, Cleveland is a really good team to tease. If you're going to, I think 6.5 is a little low. If you're going to tease it, if you'd like to run teasers, which I like to run teasers, teasing Cleveland down to 0.5 point is pretty good. I did forget to mention too, for those of us in New York at least, Giants, they have a boost on FanDuel. Barkley, I think it's over 50 yards rushing and a touchdown scored is at plus 175. That was an easy bet for me to make. I mean, I think the 50 yards rushing is pretty, barring anything stupid, he should be there. If you could do that in one run. And then the touchdown, the touchdown's a touchdown. He's at, minus whatever for touchdown. So to, pull that number up by getting the 50 yards rushing, I think makes a lot of sense. I definitely bet that this morning. Anything else on this game that we need to talk about, or should we move on to what's bound to be the most exciting game of the week, New England and Pittsburgh? with that giant 40-point total. This game actually has a higher than the Jets-Browns. Jets-Browns, I think, is at 39, and this is at 40, but I don't see it. From a tournament perspective, there's nothing that says tournament from New England. I suppose if you believe that they're going to trounce Pittsburgh, Damian Harris at 5,500 in a similar price range as Daryl Henderson makes, I guess, works with the Patriots defense, but I'm not in love with that. I do like Chase Claypool at his price point. I think the fact that Najee Harris is playing pulls down Chase Claypool from a cash potential, because I do think you would have seen Deebo Samuel carries. But with Najee Harris being healthy, I think Claypool is more of a tournament play. And I know you talked about the tournaments, but I really do like Najee Harris as a tournament play. I don't think anyone's going to be on him this week. And I think at 6,200, he's ridiculous. He's especially early only slate. Fries should see a ton of targets, but I just, again, Conklin and Juwan. I've really not moved off Juwan Johnson at tight end at all for cash. So I don't really see a reason. What about tournaments? Again, I know we attack those super low totals, but anything in this game that works? Is that Najee Harris one-off or Claypool one-off something that interests you at all, or are we just avoiding this game?
No, Clay. I thought maybe Claypool earlier in the week because he did get quite a bit of opportunities, but and he actually led the team in snap share, which I thought was pretty interesting. But then looking at it a little more, basically all his touches were at the line of scrimmage. I mean, the carries obviously, but even like his receptions, they were all so short that if they're going to get the ball in his hands, yeah, at 4,700, okay. But I'd rather find the money for Deontay Johnson, who's going to get double-digit targets again because the guy is just a friggin' monster. He doesn't always pay off, but the usage is just through the damn roof, especially at his price. Or honestly, I would go down to George Pickens.
Price him up too,
because again, all these. Yeah, they refuse to. I mean, so listen, if you're going to get 12 targets again, I mean, Deontay Johnson makes a ton of sense. I think Pickens makes a ton of sense. He played a lot of snaps last week. He didn't get many targets, but just in that general punt wide receiver area, he's literally going to carry no ownership. So it's a good pivot. The guy is ultra talented, and he's pretty clearly the number 2 receiver there. It's just a matter of getting that production in. Other than that, I mean, the Patriots side, if they're up to 3-point favorites, if you think they, win the game and can handle it pretty well, Damian Harris is the guy then, because we've seen in the past when the Patriots, win games and if they control it, Harris plays a huge role in it. I don't see that happening, but potentially.
From a betting perspective, I took the Steelers and I moved the line up to 7.5 as part of a parlay. I don't generally do too many straight bets. So when I talk about bets I'm making, it's going to be what I've done as part of a parlay. I didn't fully tease it, the 6.5, but I did pull the points up 4.5 points, or 4.5 points up to 7.5. So I got over that key number. I think it pulled the odds down to like minus 185, but as part of a teaser or part of a parlay, it made some sense to me. I think there's some value with Pittsburgh at home dogs. I was watching some video on TikTok this summer just about sports betting in general, and they said just the value on home dogs. They just say blindly bet the points with home dogs and you will make money. Now, I don't blindly do shit, but I do think there's some value to that if the numbers say that home dogs cover more often than not. If I can move the points up over a key number like 7 as part of a parlay that I'm comfortable with, I'll definitely do that. So like, I think my parlay has like Cleveland at minus 2.5. I think I moved that down just under the key number of 3. I took the Steelers plus 7.5. I think there's something to be said for that. Moving off that barn burner, we do have Miami, Baltimore. We talked about this game earlier in the show. From a cash perspective, I think from a straight cash perspective, Tyreek Hill for me is kind of a lock. In a cash plus perspective, where we're doing a little more correlation, I would correlate him with Andrews, but I don't remember what my lineup looks like, but I don't think I was able to get Tyreek into that lineup because I wanted to spend up a little more elsewhere. I think I might have even had, I don't know, maybe Taylor and Kirk or something, but I do love Tyreek Hill this week. I think he's right behind Devonte Adams. He's my number 2 receiver for the week. Taking Price out of the equation with Price in there, he's still right up there with Dorch and Paris Campbell. And so I do think Tyreek Hill is a very viable cash play. I don't see much else in this game from a cash perspective. Again, cash plus Hill with Andrews if we're looking for that correlation. But I'm going to go ahead and guess. I do like Tyreek Hill's over on whatever. I've seen his number anywhere from 58 to 71 yards. I think the over is a real good bet on Tyreek Hill on his yards. I'm interested to hear just a minute or so on your perspective, since we already talked about this game, on tournaments here. Where are you going for this?
I mean, kind of what we touched on earlier. It's Hill, it's Waddle. Chase Edmonds potentially is viable with, he looks like the lead dog there. Miami as the underdog. And then, possibly Lamar if you want to get there, and Andrews. But that's kind of it. I mean, I'm not overly excited about this game. The Miami side maybe a little more. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I think, where that one's at.
I think Edmonds stacked with Andrews in large field tournaments makes a lot of sense. And I will just say in Showdown, Demarcus Robinson I think he's being overlooked. I really like Robinson. He was on the field Duvernay got touchdowns, but Robinson was on the field for a lot more snaps. They signed him for a reason, but he was later in the camp. I do think we're going to see his role increase. He's a speed guy. I think he will be that number 2 receiver. And for Showdown, I think he makes a lot of sense. This game is really hard to stack in Showdown, but I have a Showdown lineup that actually my dad ended up helping build. Like, we worked on it together last night, and he came up with a couple of good ideas where you can fit Hill, Waddle, Andrews, and Lamar in a lineup. You just have to, you got to find that value. Durham Smythe is a guy. He's taken as the number 1 tight end pass catching for Miami. Gesicki's garbage. Demarcus Robinson's in there. So I think, and Justice Hill now with Dobbins out might be a play at, I think he's 800 or 200 or 600, something like that. Something to think about for Showdown. Indy Jacksonville. I think this game's going a little underlooked or overlooked. Underlooked? I think it's going overlooked. Taylor for cash makes sense. I think you're better off with Barkley and Mixon for your cash running backs, but Taylor is never a bad cash play. Paris Campbell for cash for sure. Should get a lot of targets with Pittman out. He was on the field the second most. Pierce is out as well. Zay Jones, Christian Kirk is too cheap. Zay Jones is too cheap. Both of them are really good plays. But I'm going to go ahead and guess, just like with the last game, this is much more of a tournament game than it is a SEC game. This is, bless you, this is a SEC game for me for tournaments. I really like this game.
Yeah, it's interesting, I would say. Taylor is Taylor. The receivers, I think, here are pretty intriguing. Kirk is kind of the clear-cut number 1, is going to get plenty of opportunities. It's a solid matchup. Campbell and Doolin are super cheap, and they're going to be the 1 and 2. Plenty of reason to use them at extremely low price points. Zay Jones, I think, being overlooked quite a bit as well. He's pretty cheap, and he's kind of the number 2 there. I think there's a lot to like there. And even the running backs, I think the running backs are sneaky. Myself included, everybody is kind of anticipating Campbell and or Doolin to get, pick up the receiving slack left by Pittman. But Frank Reich always talks up Nyheim Hines, and maybe he's the guy that picks the slack up. Just because Pittman's out doesn't mean that the receiving work is going to go right to the other receivers. Maybe it is Hines this week. I think that's an interesting, potential correlation. Hines with Christian Kirk. That could be an interesting play there. And I really like Travis Etienne as well. With Jacksonville as 3-point underdogs last week, Etienne did not have a strong game, but if you read any of my stuff this week, Etienne should have had 2 touchdowns. He was wide open in the end zone, and Trevor Lawrence overthrew him on something that should have been an easy pass. And then Etienne dropped a walk-in touchdown. So, I mean, he was, Etienne, for all intents and purposes, had 2 touchdowns last week. He would have been over 4x on his price. Everybody would have been talking about him this week in this matchup. So I think Etienne is a really, really good spot there. And also, too, not coincidentally, his price of where he is a good pivot off of some more popular players in that range. So, I think there's a lot of viability there for how this should or could play out.
I think ETN is a great investment and opportunity over on Rainmakers. And I do want to say that don't forget about Michael Strachan, not Strahan. I know that. Mike Strachan, he should get on the field. He was on the field for a bunch of snaps last week, had only 2 targets. He's a bigger play guy, a big guy for the red zone too. More showdown than anything, but he's a guy to keep an eye on as well. I think we're just going to skip over the Tampa New Orleans game only because we talked so much about it earlier. We think Tom Brady for a struggle. I don't, just Russell Gage and Brashad Price we can look at. There's no cash play. I don't think Fournette should carry some ownership. And I do, we talked about how I feel about Taysom Hill. I will ask real quick just on Michael Thomas. Is he a guy we're going back to this week, or are we a little afraid of the defense here? The matchup Michael Thomas
so
working $1,500.
Yeah, historically he's actually struggled against Carlton Davis, and also too, Thomas really, it all counts the same, but he really salvaged his day at the end with those 2 touchdown catches. He didn't say, he didn't see many targets. He actually didn't play. I think his snap rate was only like 55%. He wasn't out there all that much as you would think. Yeah, so I just think, in a probably low scoring game, you can likely do better elsewhere. I don't think the upside is really there this week.
I agree. I did bet for betting purposes. Oh, sorry. Yes, you have another point, and then I'll talk about betting.
Yeah, just because we're talking about this game, I just saw an alert that Jay Glazer is reporting. Winston has 4 fractures in his back. He's playing today, but he's in a lot of pain. Allegedly, there's no risk of further damage to it, but I guess pain tolerance could be a thing. So that can directly affect my comment. And yeah, I was gonna say maybe there. I mean, Andy Dalton's technically the backup, but how many times have we seen that story where Dalton's gotten thrust into work and he just stinks? Well,
I just think in general, you'll see a lot more Wildcat. You'll see a lot more Wildcat if Jameis can't play. I think there's a chance even with Jameis coming out for a play or two. I think it's far more likely you'll see Taysom just take the snaps than Dalton. I think Dalton will only come in if Jameis cannot return to the game.
Yeah, and if Jameis is that banged up, maybe Taysom Hill at tight end where he can, even though he's expensive, potentially deeper fields. I think it gives a little more credence to Mark Ingram. Again, it's a really, really tough matchup, but, when you're in that price range where a lot of the some of the popular names are, it helps.
For betting, I bet the under on Tom Brady passing yards just because he struggles against Tampa. I will probably now bet the under on Jameis passing yards. I do like Jarvis Landry in Showdown. This game's going to be ugly. I think this is going to be one of the uglier games on the slate. Washington, Detroit, we talked about quite a bit. We like the passing game more than the running game. Cash, I like Wentz for cash. I think Curtis Samuel at 4,600 is really strong cash. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown for a cash plus, if you're going to stack this game, makes a lot of sense. I think this is going to be a really fun game. I'm hoping this game doesn't disappoint. I'm hoping Wentz plays well and Detroit continues to stay plucky. Anything that we didn't cover from a tournament. Oh, Gutta stepped aside for a second. So I will talk about the tournament for a second. I don't think there's anything we didn't cover from a tournament perspective. Use the passing game. Go with the 2 pass catchers and a run back. If you're due in Detroit, I think it should absolutely be St. Brown with Chark, maybe Hawkinson, and Washington. It's going to be Samuel with either McLaurin or Dotson. I think Dotson is 3rd on the chart there. I'm going to move on to Seattle, San Francisco. Good, we skipped over you completely for Washington, Detroit because we covered it already, and I said our piece.
Yeah, that's right. We covered
betting wise, I don't have much to bet on that game. I do think Gibson is a viable play this week as well in a standoff as a one-off or as a run back. If you're going to use St. Brown as a secondary stack. Seattle, San Francisco. From a cash perspective, I don't think Jeff Wilson is a cash play this week. I think he's going to carry some ownership. Too much running back by committee. I know Shanahan loves him, but they've already talked about Davis Price buying opportunity, by the way, and Mason getting some work. Mason was one of my guys in the preseason, but I'm definitely not using him this week. I'm avoiding a lot of this game, other than you kind of talked me into Debo with your article in tournament. I think Debo could be a slate breaker. I've got more exposure to him than I expected. What are your thoughts? Quick thoughts on this game from a tournament perspective? Because I don't think you're going to play this game very heavily outside of maybe Lance and or Debo.
Yeah, it's really kind of Lance, Wilson, Debo. That whatever exposure I have, that's where it's falling. I think for tournaments, Wilson's a very good option there. Wilson has a lot of upside. He's when he has played in the past.
Yes.
He's got 7 games where he's played 55% of the offensive snaps or more. 3 games he scored 11 points or less. 4 other games he had scores of 17.9, 30, 26.4, and 20.8. 5,100. I will take that risk reward every single day in a tournament.
For sure. I do think if you're doing a run back in this game, it should be Metcalf as run back on any of your San Francisco players because Gino looked like he was to him, but I will also have no problem running Wilson in a tournament or Debo naked. I think that's the way to go. The Atlanta Rams game. This is, options are Cooper Kupp, but you're probably using Devonte Adams instead, and it's really hard in cash to get to both and feel comfortable with your lineup because you do want to spend up a little bit at running back. Daryl Henderson, right? I mean, he's going to be the guy in cash. Even if he sees a decrease in work, I do think that you still can get him into your cash lineup because he'll carry such a high ownership. And so if he bombs, not a big deal. But if he does have a good game, and Atlanta is notorious for giving up big passing games to running backs, I do think that you need to have that exposure. So I do have Henderson in cash. I don't think he's necessarily in a cash plus where you're looking at a little more tournament strategy. Am I right in thinking the tournament play for this, Gutta, is just attack the passing game instead of using Henderson?
Yes. Yeah. I think that, in this type of spot coming off a primetime game and everybody's already, are they Super Bowl hangover? The offense is struggling, all that. It's the get right game, and it's definitely for the passing game in a tournament. And also too, I think the game is quite stackable as well.
Yep.
I do like the Atlanta run backs. I think London makes a ton of sense. He's gonna continue to get a ton of targets. The kid looks pretty damn good already. And I think the other good spot, I don't really like Kyle Pitts. I prefer Patterson. Last week Patterson got much more of the running work because Damian Williams got hurt. I mean, Damian Williams is going to be out this week, so they're going to be able to plan ahead. Algier will probably be active and get some carries, and I think we'll see more of Patterson in the pass game too. And he's, again, for his workload, pretty damn cheap at only $6,000 in a potential high scoring game.
I like Algier as a potential just to give him some work if they are going to limit a little more Patterson's rushing work. And I would venture to say, outside of the major stacks, this is probably the highest upside leverage stack on the slate. It's Cooper Kupp, and I do think Allen Robinson is bound to come around, though I may prefer Tyler Higbee as my secondary piece to Allen Robinson here. We're not going to talk much about Arizona, Las Vegas, because we did already. Greg Dorch is your cheap cash option. He's going to see plenty of targets. He has a tough matchup, but the volume should be there. He had 9 targets last week, played really well in the preseason. And in the cash plus avenue, he's going to run back to Devonte Adams, who should be your cash wide receiver. Devonte Adams' family is in the house for this game. There's a lot of narrative there because they've not really seen him play, I don't think, since early in his career, maybe even college. And it's in front of the home fans against an Arizona team that got absolutely lit up last week. I think the Raiders' passing game is in a good spot here. In terms of leverage, James Conner, is that kind of where your leverage is coming, or is it Josh Jacobs in a tournament? Which side of it? Is it Conner or Jacobs or both?
Both, really. I mean, you can easily make the argument for both of them. It just depends, who you think wins or where you think the scoring goes. Listen, Josh Jacobs could have a little extra wind to his back this week with Brandon Bolden out. He was the favored pass down back last week. So I don't know if McDaniel's going to go all Belichick and use Amir Abdullah as the pass down back, or if he's going to give Josh Jacobs a little more work, which if Jacobs is getting some passing down work, all of a sudden that 5,800 price tag looks really, really intriguing there.
I agree with that. My best ball teams hope that Josh Jacobs gets a little more work. I do fear Amir Abdullah and Zamir White and all that, but I've got more Conner than I do Jacobs for my leverage piece. We talked about the Denver-Houston game, about that being a potential to stack with Russell Wilson carrying little ownership, but the receivers looking popular. If the receivers are all 3 receivers, including the tight end, are going to do well, you would think that Wilson's going to do well. I just am more curious, who is your run back on Houston? It's a little too early, unfortunately, if Brevin Jordan's going to play. If Brevin Jordan's out, I think OJ Howard's a run back. Is it Cooks? I mean, or are you just not running this back? Are you just going with a full Denver blowout? Is it Rex Burkhead? Is like in this game on the Houston
the easy answer is Cooks. It makes the most sense. It's a little bit of a difficult matchup. Denver's secondary is pretty good. So that'll be a little give and take. I think Burkhead makes sense because as 10-point underdogs,
Terrifying,
you already kind of know, Burkhead. Yeah, I mean, Burkhead right now is the 1A, and even if they give Pierce more work on like first and second down, Burkhead's the pass down back, So if Houston's up double digits in the second half, it's going to be all Burkhead. I think there's going to be enough opportunities there for him to pay off. Again, it's not an ideal thing you want to put in your lineup, but I think for the game flow, and if you're stacking Denver, it makes sense because that's kind of where it's going to go.
Yeah, we're not hot on Houston, and just if you're going to run back, that's the way to go. And again, in showdown, Burkhead, makes some sense. I think Denver is a team you can throw into a parlay on a tease. I think they win this handily. I think they were embarrassed on Monday night, and I think they show out this week. I think Houston could be in trouble this week. I'm not keen on Houston pieces or any Houston pieces really, unless I have to. And then finally, the smush game of the week: Cincinnati, chalky defense going up against Cooper Rush makes a lot of sense. Yes, leverage would be to go with a Dallas stack, but I'm not that crazy. Joe Mixon, I love stacking him with the Cincy defense, cash plus tournaments. I've got a lot of. I pretty much only ran Cincinnati in tournaments because I'm not worried about my defense getting leverage at this point. I just wanted to save the money. That led me to a bunch of Mixon. I think your boy Dalton Schultz could be someone that makes some sense because Freiermuth had a really good game against Cincinnati, and who else are they going to throw to? I'm not sure Cooper Rush can get it down to CeeDee Lamb. And I'm really excited about Dennis Houston. I don't think we are. Schultz saw a ton of targets. I don't think he's cash viable, but I do think he's probably tournament viable. What are your thoughts on this game? Is this Cincinnati stack one of the better stacks passing wise? Is it Dalton Schultz? What are we doing with this game, or are we just avoiding it for tournaments?
I think Schultz is probably the only play on Dallas you would even want to look at. Obviously the leverage on the Cincy side is using the pass game instead of Mixon. One thing that I threw out there, if you do want to use the Bengals defense and you want to differentiate somewhat, I think using Chase or T. Higgins stacked with the defense makes a ton of sense. Because again, you're kind of looking at the same narrative that since he controls, wins easily, all that type of stuff. But what if the 28-point lead comes because they throw for 3 touchdowns? So potentially Burrow there makes sense, or even again they win really easily. They kind of handle it, and Higgins maybe has a big day with it. You can tell kind of the same story with differentiating a little bit, especially that Higgins is only 5,900 compared to Chase's 8,000. It's a little more viable, I think, to look at it that way.
This doesn't seem like the craziest thing I've ever run out there in terms of a high leverage stack with the run back, and you just throw that Bengals defense in there anyway. No one's going to have this, I don't think. I think it's going to be Mixon, and I surely don't think T. Higgins is going to carry a lot of ownership coming off the concussion with the chance of re-injury. I'm not 100% sure this isn't the worst way to go, and we'll do that. Let's fill out the rest of this lineup. What else do we want to do with this lineup? Let's see. I'll enter this while we're here before we get out of here. What do we like to run? Give me a running back wide receiver stack that would work this with this lineup that we could throw in there for fun.
Well, we've already differentiated quite a bit with the main piece. So let's say you want a running back wide receiver.
Is this like a Barkley, Robbie Anderson or DJ Moore spot? Is this I don't know.
You know what? I would say I would do let's see. If we want some exposure to Vegas and Arizona, I think Jacobs Hollywood Brown is pretty unique.
I like that. That's kind of sexy. Let's see. Jacobs. Ooh, he's all the way down here. And it's not going to break the bank. You're still going to have money to do other things. Let's see. Hollywood Brown. Marquise at 62. And then what if... I got an idea for maybe how we can round this bad boy out, depending upon where the price is on this. We'll have more than enough money to do it. What if we go with boy ETN at running back, which leaves us enough money to do whatever we want with value wide receiver. I would throw Paris Campbell in there and then maybe just pull off the Bengals defense. Does that work? Is that a tournament lineup? Is that
big
ATN
time
in there? So I'm not using a lot of ATNs. Come on, Paris Campbell. Where are you? 3,700. Let's go. Paris Campbell, and that gives us an extra 800 for our defense. Is that right? Is my math correct there, math teacher?
Yeah. I mean,
$800 grand on a defense. Who is it?
You can go
Patriots. Can't go Cowboys, but we could definitely go Panthers, Patriots. Let's go.
I mean, you
Steelers.
can't even
I
go.
like the Steelers defense.
I mean, if being the way the lineup is set up, it's more risky. But we have no exposure to that Washington-Detroit game. You can go Commanders, and with the Lions down 3 offensive linemen plus Jared Goff is Jared Goff. Maybe that game fails, and the Commanders' defense is one of the higher scoring ones.
Boom. And I'll fix this later by getting my later game guy in the what's it called? The flex. Run your later game guys in the flex. All right, let's see. We have one more question, then we'll say goodbye to everybody. What's Sean got for us? He loves Paris. Paris, there you go. Paris, add Paris and run a higher end running back, baby. Paris Campbell is the dirty hot play of the week. Sean loves him, so getting Paris in there works. Very excited about that. Gutta, good show today. Things went well. I like how this went. I like the format today, and I think we're in a really good spot for a fun week. Let's just hope, let's hope that Patriots-Steelers game isn't the game that goes for 65 total points. But, of course, we crapped on it, so clearly Damian Harris, 8 touchdowns, and, George Pickens and Mitch Trubisky will connect for 4. So that's how it works with us. We crap on a game, and it goes to shit for us. Everyone have a great week. Check us out. Just come find me at Bankster17 on Twitter. In my pinned comment, my pinned tweet has the link to sign up. $3.99 a week gets you access to everything we do, all of our bets, all of our sports, all of our chats, all of our articles, all of our heat maps at Heat Map Fantasy Sports. For Michael Gudadero at the Big Gutta, I am Doug Shane at Bankster17. We will see you next week and in our chat soon.